Eagle 6 in the track.
Roger.
Viper 1 bombs away. One's going to climb high above 20. You're south.
Eagle 6 radar contact. Eagle 6 is visual.
And it goes left.
Welcome back to the DCS SITREP, where we discuss news and information about the world's premier combat flight simulator for the home PC. You guessed it, it's DCS World. I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog, and today we look at the big newsletter from ED this past week, which comes hot on the heels of their 2024 and beyond video from the previous week. The newsletter was something of a commitment revelation, in my view, in terms of acknowledging areas that they wish to improve, which includes bug fixing based on community feedback. I know a lot of you will be shouting for that, and a variety of new modules and features. The core improvement, though, centers on VulkanAPI for 2024, which is going to be good news for most of us in the community, and something that they've been working on for quite a while. So let's take a look at this and other news in a little bit more detail for this week's SITREP. Well, let's begin with VulkanAPI, which is something we've discussed on the channel in the past a little. ED described that with the release of multi-threading and DLSS FSR, the next big DCS task is to support the implementation of Vulkan Application Programming Interface, also known as API. Multi-threading was a prerequisite to support the VulkanAPI backend and enhance system performance efficiency. Much of the VulkanAPI work over the past several years has focused on adapting the DCS internal tools to seamlessly integrate with optimized functionality to ensure peak performance. This has been a challenging endeavor to rectify all validation errors, streamlining graphics and processing tasks, improving compatibility with NVIDIA, AMD, and also Intel hardware, and they say a diverse set of drivers, creating and refining the groundwork for rendering across multiple threads that will allow even more advanced graphic capabilities. This is exciting. Now, as they move into 2024, they remind us that to optimize and refine performance to exceed what is currently possible with DirectX 11, it is important that they continue to push graphic standards while maintaining excellent performance for both 2D and even more so for VR. And while we're talking about VR, shout out to Pimax, who very, very kindly reached out and have given me one of their headsets to test out. So we will be doing some unboxing and first impressions of using that system. It's a new thing for me. So yeah, once again, thanks to Pimax for that. And Wags also let me know that he got a set this past week as well. So I'm in good company. Now, a couple of caveats here with regards to this VulkanAPI stuff. They do remind us that like multi-threading and the DLSS and FSR, the results are going to vary between players based on their hardware and settings. And I think that's a given. I see this a lot where people complain about the way in which updates like the multi-threading, etc., have not necessarily provided them with the salubrious updates that they expected. And this is not something that DCS and Eagle Dynamics can necessarily control. There's so much variability out there. However, overall, if there is a frame rate boost or any kind of performance enhancement, that's all you really need to focus on and hope the best for. I think VulkanAPI should give them a little bit more control over the way that their pretty old software, in fairness, pretty old code, is going to improve with our modern hardware. So what does it all mean, in other words? So if I give this my plainer sim guides to VulkanAPI, which, as many of you will know, is a follow-on product from OpenGL and allows programmers to not have to be stuck using, say, DirectX 11, Microsoft's product. And remember that the API stands for the Application Programming Interface, which they mentioned before. So consider it like an interface between the game that you're playing and how it can communicate properly with the software that's used in the hardware on your computer, particularly in this case, the GPU and the CPU. Now, one of the key features of Vulkan API is apparently its ability to offer more direct control over the GPU and also lower the CPU usage, which is really important for DCS World because in the past, remember, it tended to be very CPU dependent because it was built at a time when GPUs were relatively not all that powerful compared to the CPU processing power at that particular time. Both, I guess, GPUs and CPUs improved massively from 15 years ago when DCS was first being developed. So, one of the caveats, though, again, here is that Vulkan API is designed to be used with multi-core systems. So this is why, as they said, they had to unlock the multi-core and threading issues before they could unlock the access to the Vulkan API software. Unlocking that core engine and its ability to tap into multi-core processing, I think, was one of the biggest leaps in performance that we've had for DCS World in quite a while. So in theory, Vulkan API should, I believe, allow ED to have much better control over the way in which the game interacts with our hardware, and also remember across multiple platforms for both AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel, as they said. And if that works, then we should, in theory, have a boost in performance. They've also really signaled a heck of a lot of programming work that has gone on, which, as I indicated before, to breathe really new life into some pretty old code. And that avoids the need to basically scrap the game entirely and rewrite it on a new game engine. Say, for example, Unreal 5 or whatever else is running these days. And some people have asked why that DCS and ED hasn't done that. Of course, it's not a simple task, and neither is the work that they've been doing with the core engine to fix all these things. So that's, gives you a little clue as to some of the work that's going on behind the scenes. And I think, ED deserves some credit there. They do get a lot of flack for some of the things that are going on and why this, that, and the other hasn't been fixed. And it's difficult to fix bugs, I think, and all the bugs when you are redressing some other core engine issues, because as you do that, you potentially introduce some other problems, if you see what I mean. Everything is interconnected, and potentially exponentially, you can find other problems occurring as you flow in all of these fixes and updates and correct things. Other issues need to be squashed. So it's a complex series of problems and not one I envy anyone having to do. So the bottom line, though, is I'm looking forward to seeing this update. I suspect it could be the icing on the cake for improved performance. Let me know if you agree in the comments section below, and we'll have that discussion.
Holly 31, take a broad 01728.
So in addition to the game's engine performance improvements, as described, ED also announced an extensive list of what I'm calling quality of gaming experiences or quality of life experiences that are also planned for DCS. So stand by, it's quite a list here, and it's going to include the following things. Now this one's an answer to prayer, I think: save game. So our new persistent system, they say, will allow you to save mid-mission and return to that save point at a later time. I think this is an answer to prayer for many players, including myself, because there's often missions within the campaigns that I haven't really had time to complete. If some of these missions are well over an hour long, and you just run out of time of an evening in busy schedules to be able to come back to it, and you have to start afresh. And so you just sort of, it's like Groundhog Day, you get back in and then you're just pushing for time at the end of an evening. And so this is going to be fantastic news for most of us. The next one is the replay system, and the current track file system was originally created, and we've discussed this before, as actually a debugging system or tool that simply reproduced game input to construct a replay of the mission. Now, the system depends on limited DCS version changes between when the track was recorded and when being played back. So the system in development for 2024, and there's a clue there too, in development, is designed to address this and will offer additional capabilities. So they haven't explained what those additional capabilities are. We'll have to see what they describe later on when this gets implemented. I suspect that we should have a more comprehensive and functional replay system, which is going to be very, very handy for content creators like myself and those just wanting to record cool stuff that happens sometimes in the game. And yeah, I'm really excited about that. So we'll have to wait and see what they do with the replay system. Now, infantry unit improvements. This WAGS talked about this during a recent Mover and Gonki show. They are working on new infantry models and animations in 2024, along with more lifelike behaviors. Similar to what we saw, I guess, with the deck crew. This is going to be very, very exciting because they are pretty wooden right now, and sometimes they don't always do what they're supposed to, depending on bugs and so on and so forth. All right, next, new air, ground, and naval units. So new units will be available in 2024 that will range from World War II to modern day. Each unit requires thousands of man-hours to create and will be provided as optional packs at their highest level of detail. Well, here we go. So what does that mean? So standard versions will be available for free to ensure both single-player and multiplayer compatibility for all. So in other words, there's going to be pay for DLC with regards to AI units and across the gamut here, air, ground, and naval units. So we'll have to wait and see what kind of packages are available and whether or not it's worth owning the high detail models. I guess it depends on your bent, and probably content creators like myself would benefit from that for cinematic points of view, but yeah, I guess it depends on the price point as well. So we'll have to wait and see how that evolves during 2024. Cool stuff. Graphic improvements. Now, in addition to the graphic improvements that VulkanAPI will afford, we will also be making improvements to the render graph for VR performance, new and improved special effects, and further enhancements in the Flare rendering system. So that's good news, and like I said, Pimax kindly sent me one of the VR systems to test out, which I will bring you, as I said, some more of my impressions over the next wee while. I'm looking forward to seeing how it compares when I first try it out and during the course of 2024. Stay tuned. Weather. Now, the weather focus for 2024 will be on a new fog system and towering clouds with appropriate line of sight blocking. Now, that's a big one there because we have talked about this in the past where the AI can see you through the clouds regardless. That's going to be particularly useful, I think, for, again, creating some realism. I get a lot of questions about whether or not we will see more dynamic weather in the game, and I think specifically turbulence, which is not fully modeled in the game right now. We do have wake turbulence, which a lot of players don't use, but there isn't a fully modeled weather effect of this nature just yet. That's something I'd love to see, and I wonder if it's feasible, perhaps, as the game evolves performance-wise. We'll have to wait and see. And we're talking, you don't fly into thunderclouds. That's just not a thing to do unless you have a particular aircraft that's capable of doing that, storm chaser type aircraft. But most cases, pilots fly around over weather to avoid it, and jet fighters as well, particularly. It's just dangerous to do that. So, but I'd still like to see some weather effects that model turbulence. And believe it or not, the wake turbulence, and I've seen complaints about this in the past, but I actually had a real pilot tell me that that's actually really dangerous stuff. It is legitimately there as a threat in takeoff, which is why there's usually a several seconds, let's say a 6 to 12 second takeoff, depending on the configuration of the aircraft, the weather involved and all that kind of stuff, because he was actually telling me that some pilots taking off behind a larger aircraft got up to 90 degrees of bank due to the wake turbulence of larger aircraft ahead. So it is a legitimate thing, even if some people kind of question its realism. Yeah, it is actually pretty good. So that's a whole topic in itself, as you can tell. Next on the list here, voice chat. Now, this has been an interesting discussion, I guess. 2023 saw great connectivity Improvements in a unique real-time voice processing allow users to modify voices to replicate different radio eras and technologies, which is cool. I haven't tried this out in fairness, but in 2024, ED will continue to integrate radios to vehicles, ships, and other units. Very cool. And they also plan external application support and other player-requested features. What those are, I don't know. But again, cool. WAG's indicated some of the challenges of integrating third-party products into the core engine. They have to have control over some of this and be able to update it, which is what he indicated. So that's why they've gone for their own in-house system over SRS. In fairness, I totally understand that. Moving on to the spherical Earth. Now, we had discussion on this. One of the biggest changes coming to DCS is the spherical Earth. Now, this is a substantial piece of work which is ongoing. They don't expect it to be released this year due to the size of the endeavor, so we're going to have to wait and see what all that means. One of the questions that was asked in a recent Gonki and Mover session with WAGs was whether or not the maps that we currently have can be stitched together to make bigger maps, and he said the technology in the game doesn't exist as they have it to be able to do that, which is why they're moving to this spherical Earth system, which is going to give them a lot more flexibility in their maps. And so people have asked me too, well, does this mean the old maps are going to be defunct? I guess in short, yeah, in the long term. I'm also guessing that they will still exist. Once you move to the spherical Earth and the fleshing out of these maps in areas occurs, it's going to be, I think, very similar to the model that we have in Microsoft Flight Simulator, where there's a sort of a base portion of the game, and then some of these other companies, like Orbix, for example, are going to do high detailed models that you'll probably be able to pay to download, which will lend itself to high detailed campaigns that get built around all these things. So there's a lot of questions I have about this, and we'll have to wait and see more information from ED and some sort of implementation work or proof of concept, if you like, in terms of what it looks like. We're way off from that, but nonetheless, it's going to be very interesting to see if they can pull it off. Stay tuned, is the short answer.
Greedy 5-1, a left 020. Greedy 5-1, a left turn 020.
Dynamic campaign, yep, they are working on this. We saw that from their newsletter at the end of last year. And this is the DCS DC or DCS Dynamic Campaign. Refer to some of my earlier videos about that. That's coming. We're still not sure where it's at, and whether or not it's going to be implemented in 2024 seems unlikely, but stay tuned. Now, this is exciting. Air traffic control. Now, they have laid down a solid design for this to provide an exceptional ATC experience. Much of the work in 2024 will involve how they generate the voice dialogue and create a much improved interface. So, work in progress. Don't think it's going to be in 2024 by the way they're describing it here. We'll have to wait and see. Now, here's something that I enjoyed. They said improved accessibility to make DCS more accessible to new players. The GUI, or the GUI, graphic user interface, will be updated to make it more user-friendly and include a launcher with new capabilities. New interactive missions are also being developed to shallow the learning curve with popular modules like, for example, the FA-18C. So this is great news, and one of the more common complaints, or at least requests I get on my channel from viewers and community members, is about unlocking success to the various modules, which can be complex and taxing in terms of those learning curves. Now, it can be useful to watch other videos, but the variety of content available can be daunting and not always authoritative. Some of the best channels I've seen for content on my favorite aircraft aren't always the biggest and most popular ones for accuracy, brevity, and all the rest of it. And so therefore the search for information outside of what's available in DCS itself becomes also time-consuming, taxing, and potentially off-putting and frustrating. One of the reasons I don't do tutorials is just simply because of the time. It takes time to learn the aircraft, and then it is challenging to be able to explain all the things that you're actually doing with some degree of authenticity and authority. So yeah, primarily it's time, and so I think this will be good. It'll be interesting to see what they do, and we'll wait and see how that gets injected in the game. Well, here we are. Air-to-air missile development. This comes up as a discussion all the time. They plan to migrate the R-27 air-to-air 10 family and R-73 air-to-air 11 missiles to a new component structure and flight dynamics. This will be coupled with a new proximity fuse model that accounts for Doppler closing speed, modified seekers, and a more realistic interaction model between the missile and the supporting radar. This will be done within the larger MiG-29 project framework, so other missile types will also be developed in a similar way. So this came up as a discussion point last week about the MiGs, in the 29 in this case, ability to carry competitive missile types with the Blue Force missile sets, primarily the AMRAAM. It seems ED is well aware of this, and therefore we'll see an embellishment of the Red 4 missile sets, which hopefully will satisfy the curious and the angry. It's a challenging area, though, to recreate in terms of realism and, more importantly, accuracy. We need to remember that parity isn't reflective of the objective here also, and I do tire a little bit of comments about, hey, Missile X is not realistic and performs terribly. I don't know how you know that without having some inside knowledge of how some of these missiles perform. So the AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, for example, had a pretty poor PPK record as an example, especially early on in the development. So I'd caution in using the game as a definitive for representations of missile accuracy, no disrespect to what ED's doing. Remember that the caveat on the game launch reminds us that the representation of the weapons in the game are for entertainment purposes only. So nonetheless, ED is doing its best to provide something that we can accept as reasonable, but again, I don't think it's fair to say, well, the missiles in the game suck or they don't perform very well. Indeed, they may actually be performing closer to the design parameters than you may be aware of. So, yeah, hold your horses before you get too excited. Right, moving to anti-ground munitions now. They continue to develop new munitions as well as updating existing air-to-ground weapons to include a new component model and advanced flight performance. This includes guided bombs and tactical missiles. Wags also mentioned again in that Gonki and Mover video that they were looking at some enhancements to fragmentation radiuses and other visual effects. Turning to anti-radiation missiles or ARM missiles, they're actually developing narrowband specialized seekers that they used for early arms of the 60s to the 1980s and prior to the more modern AGM-88 HARM class of missiles with broadband seekers. And these older arms, such as the AGM-45 Strike of the Vietnam era, somebody corrected me, apparently I said Strike in an earlier video with regards to the Phantom, so apologies if that was inaccurate. I don't remember saying that. It's quite possible. So Shrike, not Strike. These will be modeled with the older ARM systems. And remember that, of course, is being worked on as part of the Phantom 2. And if you're wondering why, remember that ED produces most of the weapons in game that then get plugged into the third-party module. I think there are a couple of exceptions to that, but that's the general rule of thumb. Now, this will be controversial, but ECM, they are developing more advanced principles of electronic warfare that will allow simulation of a greater variety of electronic warfare attack and countermeasure modes and capabilities. This, they say, is a very complex task and obviously a confidential subject. So why bother, you say? Well, they can't promise quick results, but work is underway to deliver, and here's the word, a satisfactory simulation of this opaque era of modern warfare. I think that's a good way of summarizing it. Again, as I said, this will raise some eyebrows because, as they've said, it's not exactly open source information and closely guarded by the manufacturers and other stakeholders, in other words, the Department of Defense and other national security stakeholders. In the past, people have complained about the lack of realism in this area, and of course, it's not properly modeled or emulated in the game. I think it needs to be emulated. The demands for more accuracy are going to be a bit of a problem, of course. So we'll have to see how they tackle that and critique it later, but I think there's a place for something of this nature in game. And I love to refer to this, but check out 10% True's podcast with Star Baby, and the episode is F-15E over the Balkans, where he described comms jamming, which was really cool, and I'd love to see this in the game. Some of which he said was he was pretty sure that the greatest hits of the Serbian Tabernacle Choir was choking the comms, so there is some scope for creating some interesting effects that, again, will add a little bit of realism to some of our flight experiences. We'll see how it goes. All right, new landing gear. So there's a new 2-component landing gear system which was released for the Mosquito last year. They're going to continue integrating it to other aircraft this year, and they plan a separate newsletter article that will explain the new capabilities and what that brings to landing gear behaviors. I'm really looking forward to that. I think, again, the conceptual stuff that they're doing in terms of the handling, and I think also the ground handling of aircraft as it rolls across tarmac and copes with minor bumps and thumps in the terrain, is very, very interesting. So yeah, excited about that kind of stuff. It appeals to the nerd in me. And we'll see again how that evolves. I know that Flying Iron Simulations spent a lot of time discussing the hydraulic system that they have for their aircraft and the way in which the landing gear works, particularly when it's landing on the aircraft carrier. So again, any work in this area I think is very, very interesting. So again, if it improves our experiences and our immersion experiences, then that's good for the game. So quite a list of interesting additions coming to DCS World, and I think it's going to provide, as I said, some pretty interesting quality of life improvements, and again, I'm looking forward to seeing them in game. Now, moving over to some other stuff, they reminded us that in parallel with the development of the new modules, as we discussed in last week's newsletter, they also continue to update, fix, and improve existing aircraft and maps. And they said that some of these efforts include, but are not limited to, the following. Good news. Radar improvements. In 2023, they released both Phase 1 and 2 of the radar improvements for the F-16C and the F-18C. Phase 3 efforts will continue with a focus on better single-target track simulation, false target generation, and more realistic look-down effects. Very cool. This comes up all the time. Data transfer card, or DTC. For each aircraft, the DTC consists of a variety of areas that are first modeled, such as data link, navigation, radio weapons, sensors, and more. Once those elements are completed, they will then be able to organize into a more unified state the DTC interface. Wags brought this up as it's definitely something they had planned. He can't see any impediment to this at this stage, and so unless there is an impediment that prevents them from doing this, which again I guess comes back to the prior topics of data link and radio, etc., then that will be implemented in the game. So again, stay tuned. I know a lot of people are looking forward to that. Few settings. Now, all modern aircraft will benefit from the new and more advanced fusing options, which was first introduced for World War II modules. This includes the new payload interface in the mission editor and the rearm refuel window that will allow more authentic setting of nose and tail fuses and new 3D rendering of the fuse selections. Really cool. Talking about the Viper here, so the priority for 2024 in the Viper includes the Sniper Advanced Targeting Pod, which I'm sure you'll all be looking forward to. A first perspective pilot model, somebody brought this up the other day, we need that, and other improvements like the new HUD symbology and the RWR handoff tones. The F-18C, this is something we've discussed in the past, and the biggest 2024 task they say is a refactoring of the flight model and flight control system, the landing gear physics, and improved external lights. That is going to be really cool. Now, once the new external lighting system is completed for the FA-18C, this technology will be used for other aircraft modules. Cool. Wags brought up, I think, in one of those, again, Gonki and Mover videos, that he told Gonki that they were going to improve the flight model in such a way that you should be able to get an increase in alpha, because remember that the F-18C is not restricted, doesn't have it's not alpha limited. There are cool things about that and good things about that, but also bad things. So that, again, will improve its lethality in the dogfight arena, and will again pose some interesting challenges for people. So really cool stuff. We'll see how things go there. All right, the Apache, with the addition of the fire control radar, I haven't had a chance to check that out yet, and its core functions. The next steps in 2024 will include the addition of functions and modes such as link and the remaining radar modes. There was also going to be some new George and flight commands and a campaign for the Apache. That will be really cool. And again, that'll lend itself to some reasons to fly it. I think it's a great module. They've done a nice job of that, and it's a hugely popular aircraft. So yeah, stay tuned again. The supercarrier, I'm really hoping they inject some stuff in this arena because it's been a long time coming. They say here that 2024 will see continued work on new plane director operations that move aircraft out of the landing area to a parking location. This is in addition to work on the airboss deck and ready room. I'd love to see a little bit more hustle on the deck with regards to the AI. People, I know they've talked about making some improvements there, but they are a little slow. It's a very, very dynamic environment, and it's not often that people are just meandering around walking, except when there's no flight operations going on, because, you know, you have to have your head on a swivel out there, and sometimes they're a little cash, I think. Now, if you've seen, again, the Mover and Gonki shows recently with WAGs, you'll be aware that Wombat is going to be the voice of the new airboss, apparently, so it's definitely a work in progress. As I said, it's long overdue. We've been promised updates to the supercarrier for some time. They keep teasing things, but as yet, not a lot of the stuff hasn't been implemented. I am eager to see these improvements and additions to the plane deck, which will inject, hopefully, some fresh drama into the complex workings of the supercarrier and its flight operations. So yeah, let's hope for a 2024 update sooner rather than later. And lastly here, the Mosquito FB6, they continue working on features from the early access list, including the AI crew members and the drift recorder, and that's about all they said on that. Rest assured, they say, though, that other modules and maps will also receive improvements and enhancements. And then they rounded out the newsletter by reminding us that with the winter sale, which is coming to a close, I think, tomorrow, so don't miss out on modules and maps and other game features that you want to include to enhance your flight experiences in DCS World. It's a good time to pick some stuff up in anticipation of further improvements later on in the year.
Magic 481, check your image 5, request words.
Well, something not covered in this week's newsletter was another video by Red Star Simulations, who are producing the MiG-17. This is going to be a very popular Cold War era jet, ready to tangle, or wisely avoid tangling with the soon-to-be released Phantom II, depending on your point of view. I'll post a link in the video, or to the video at least, in the description below, but the team showcased some of the MiG-17's flight characteristics, the fun that can be had with it, and some possible tactical considerations when deploying it in certain flight regimes. The video is from GVAD, the pilot, and it begins with a caveat about everything that we're looking at is work in progress, although he hinted that the flight model is pretty much complete. Now, we only see the aircraft from the perspective from the cockpit of his aircraft, both the F5 that he was flying and also the Mirage F1. He doesn't fly the MiG-17, so they've kept some of the mystery intact with regards to what it looks like inside and what it's looking like, etc., etc. But it's still worth a look for those trying to find insight on how the venerable machine will operate in DCS World. It's not clear at this time if the model has been farmed out to ED for approval, etc., etc., or if this is still in a earlier point in the development process, or pre-approved development status, if you like. But any news and progress is always good to see. I know some people get very worried about third-party silence, and we didn't hear anything, for example, from the A1 Skyraider in the 2024 and beyond, so some people noticed some gaps here and there. Again, we'll have to wait and see if 2024 is a year that, gives us a little bit more of a hint about how those third-party developers are progressing. It's not uncommon for them to be quiet. Speaking of third-party developers, Magnitude 3 also published a few screenshots for us from the 2024 and beyond video, just to remind us how cool the Corsair looked in that video. The good news is that WAG's confirmed an AI Japanese Zero is coming to the game, so all of those aviation-fueled Pacific theater fans are chomping at the bit to get their hands on the controls of a virtual Corsair. And at some point later in the progress, the Hellcat, which is ED's in-house World War II Pacific Theater fighter, you will have something to go and shoot down till your heart's content, which is great news. So as we saw previously, there are a plethora of new assets coming to DCS, along with the Marianas World War II version of the map, which is promised. So there's a heck of a lot of stuff going on for this year. We'll see as the year progresses what ED is able to churn through and release. So stay tuned to the SITREPs for updates and information on that. Well, this has been a long SITREP because there's been a lot of content. Thanks for tuning in once again. I hope this video found you well and that 2024 is promising to be a good one. We'll see you next time. This is Prickly Hedgehog out. Looking forward to the Phantom, hopefully, the Phantom 2 from Heapler Simulations as one of the first modules released this year. Fingers crossed. That'll do for this week. Cheerio.
Charlie 31, copy, Bravo 04515 to 17,000, take those 64, L1011.
Charlie 31 special. Charlie 31's climbing to 230.